Continuing on with the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab Outstanding Guest Speaker Series, today we are pleased to present Peter McCracken. Peter is an electronic resources librarian at Cornell University, where he has worked with electronic resources and open access publishing, among other projects, since 2016. In 2000, Peter co-founded Serial Solutions, a company that helped libraries and their patrons manage and access electronic journals. In 2009, he co-founded shipindex.org, a company that helps people do research on ships. He holds a BA in English Literature from Oberlin College, an MS, a Master of Library Science from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a Master's in Maritime History from East Carolina University. As a maritime researcher, Peter wrote 65 quarterly columns on maritime history on the internet, in Sea History magazine, and has presented numerous webinars for genealogy societies and maritime organizations on doing maritime history research online. So I'd like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Peter.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I look forward to sharing with you information about how to do maritime history research and how it can impact the genealogical research that you're doing. I hope that everyone has got a copy of the sort of the outline and the overview. It's got some links on it that might be useful, and it's an overview and intention of what we hope to cover today. So I will spend some time. I'll use that as my guide, and it actually being on 3 pages I found is pretty useful, because if we don't get all the way to the 3rd page, then we can all just throw away that 3rd page and pretend that it's just 2 pages long, and that's all that we planned to cover. But we'll see. We'll see how we do on time. As we talked about, if you've got a question, feel free to raise your hand and ask that question, or put it in the chat and we can address it. If it's a pretty quick question, if it's something that we think we should come back to later on, then we can do that as well. So, you know, I am one of the things that I want to talk about at the very end is this book project that I'm currently working on. But I got a note yesterday about that from one of the reference librarians at the university where I work, who said that she provides genealogy support and research in our library. And before I got employed by the library, I once went to a course that she taught for the community. So I know she's been doing this for a long time, and I'm looking for folks who can share the information about what sort of maritime history questions they've gotten over the years. And in response to some seeking feedback, she sent a note to me saying, "Yeah, I don't think I've really kind of never really had any questions about ships related to genealogy." And I kind of thought, how is that possible? I mean, unless you were here, you came on a land bridge, or you came up from, South or Central America, or you arrived in the last 60 years, your ancestors came by ship. I mean, it's just, and vessels remain such an important part of our world today. Now, we don't notice them, we don't see them as much as we used to, because the big ships coming into the big ports no longer come into the center of the city anymore, right? They don't come into New York City. They don't come into, they come to Elizabeth, New Jersey, and they stay away from the centers where they used to be. And there are far fewer ships because they are so much bigger than they used to be. And of course, people don't travel by ship anymore unless it's a kind of the reason for the voyage there. So I think those are maybe some reasons why we don't notice vessels as much as I think we should. And in the United States, we also don't seem to have a lot of interest in maritime history. There are only 2 master's programs in maritime history in the United States, where in England, which is obviously a much smaller country, they've got a whole bunch of them. There was a whole program on new researchers in maritime history, which had grad students who are working from multiple different universities that didn't include the great big ones like Cambridge and Oxford and Edinburgh and St. Andrews. So there are all kinds of different programs and great focus on maritime history there that I don't think we really have in the United States. And I think that's a big loss. And of course, we should think about maritime history in the United States not as a coastal thing. Even if you say we've got coasts on all 4 sides of the contiguous United States, from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf of Mexico, and from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, the Mississippi is such a central part of what has made the growth of America. Also, this year is the 200th anniversary of the opening of the Erie Canal, and that had an incredible impact on the growth and the movement of people in the country. I'm headed to a conference in Buffalo. There are two conferences in Buffalo at the end of this month that are celebrating the opening of the Erie Canal, and it has such a huge impact on the spread of Americans moving west. I think it's really important. And so my goal in this work is making maritime history research easier to use. That's my real thing. I really want to make it easier for people to do maritime history research. And to that extent, one of the first things that I did was I created this index that tells you what books or magazines or websites or databases mention the vessels that you want to learn more about. There's so much more to maritime history than just vessels, but this is what this first focus is on. And I very quickly learned that this is a really valuable tool for genealogists. And so I have done a lot of work in exhibiting in genealogy conferences and speaking with groups, with genealogy societies or courses like this, and I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. I love doing that. And so, what I want to talk about are ways that maritime history research can influence, impact, and improve your genealogical research. So one of the first points I want to talk about is, how does vessel history research impact genealogy? And I think that there are a couple of great examples of that, where you can, unlike in other areas, you can learn a ton about your ancestor without ever finding anything about your ancestor. The best examples of that, I think, are if you have a service record, you know that an ancestor was on a vessel, a naval vessel, from this date to that date. You know what ship they were on, and you know when they were on there. If you can then go find a history of that ship, then you can learn about the experiences, that what happened to them, about their experiences, and you can learn more about them specifically. Similarly, we see more and more diaries or journals of people who emigrated being digitized and made available online. Now, if you already know the vessel that your ancestor emigrated on, and you can find resources by that vessel, and I'll talk a little bit more of that in a moment, then maybe you can find another person's uh, record of that actual voyage. Now, if that, and admittedly, that may be that's a longer shot than learning the history of a vessel that an ancestor served on, but it is possible, it is doable, and it can happen. And imagine that, you don't find any mention of, you probably wouldn't find a mention of your ancestor in this diary. But imagine if you did. I mean, wouldn't that be incredible? But even if you don't, you get to know what their voyage was like through this other person's words. And I think that's really powerful. I think it can be a great addition to understanding your ancestors' experiences. And then I guess a little bit further down the road, I love the genealogical phrase of adding leaves to the tree. If you're writing a history of your family, and you're working on stuff, and you just want to add a picture of the vessel that your grandparents took their honeymoon on, right? On a honeymoon cruise, that's a nice addition. And it may not, obviously, it doesn't mean anything like those other examples that I had, but it can be a very nice addition to what you're putting together. So I think that there are a lot of cases where maritime history research is one part of, obviously, many different parts that can influence the genealogical work that you're doing. So, for example, I had the example of folks who served on a particular vessel let's just talk about the U.S. Navy right now. But there's an impressive number of deck logs. These are records of what happened on board a particular vessel at a particular time that have been digitized and are available. Now, a lot of these have not been transcribed, so that's really important to remember. They've only been digitized, but from my understanding is that the transcription process is moving along. So when I was looking at this, I saw the Saratoga, so I thought I'd take a look at Saratoga. as an example, let's see, where did we go? There we are. And then you find all of these records throughout Saratoga's history. And this is the deck logbook. And this isn't a particularly large right now. I have to keep it smaller so that I can scroll forward a bit. But what's worth noting is that there are names in here, new absentees. Wouldn't it be fun to find one of your ancestors on here, because you knew that they were on board, and now you can find out that they were missing on certain dates for some reason. Who knows why? But these are the kinds of things that can be found. These are fairly, in a way, fairly technical documents, but they do have usually handwritten descriptions, I guess, yeah, of what was going on at the time and on board that particular vessel. So this is telling them what was happening on Saratoga in 1970. And there are a lot of other records that go back well before 1940. There's a separate page that lists pre-1940, and those are mostly 19th century records and logbooks. So there's a lot of information that's available there. There are a couple of other examples of ways that you might find information in passenger lists about other members of your family who maybe you didn't know about, or maybe there's some other record that would be useful by looking at passenger lists. And there are some great passenger lists that have been transcribed. They've been digitized and then transcribed for voyages to Australia. They're really quite incredible. It's a lot of work that has gone into those. So that's a pretty neat tool to use as well. So these are a couple of ways that you can find resources. Now, I do have this database that I created, and it's called shipindex.org. I'm gonna see if I can. I might have a little bit of a problem right now, so I'm gonna see if this works for me or not. I can't. This sounds a little silly, but I had set up a trial and I was trying to troubleshoot a trial for a library, and I got stuck only being logged in. So I can't show you the resources that you can find when you're not logged in, but of course all of you can take a look as we go and see what you can find. But one of the things that you will find in here is in the free collection. So the database is what we call a freemium database. There's about 150 or 160,000 citations. They're totally freely available. And then there's almost 4 million citations in the subscription database. And what it does is that, so if you search for Monongahela, you're finding about this vessel, and you're finding that, say in this example, Monongahela bark is mentioned in the book To Santa Rosalia, Further and Back, by Harold Hike, published by the Mariners Museum, and it is mentioned on these pages. Here's deck logs from 1963. These are logs up to 1940. I was just looking at these yesterday and just added these links yesterday. Then this is another great example. The Monongahela sailing out of Seattle, which is my hometown. So if you're from Seattle, you've been to Seattle, you may recognize the Aurora Bridge. And so the Monongahela is being towed out before the Aurora Bridge is completed, because it would be stuck in there, stuck in Lake Union if it didn't get out at that point. So I just love that this is held by the University of Washington Libraries. And so these are the things you can find through the database. So this one is in the subscription database. But what I want to highlight is this one that's in the free database. WorldCat, which I will mention a couple of times, is a guide to the holdings in many, many libraries across the United States and around the world. It's based in Ohio, so it's primarily U.S. libraries. And but it does have holdings in libraries around the world as well. So it can be useful to see all kinds of different resources to find out what exists, especially useful when you find a book that you, like say this To Santa Rosalia book. So let's just click on this Find in a Library. It will take me into WorldCat and say, okay, here's this one. So it's not showing like I was gonna let it do its thing and show how useful it is, and then I would start complaining about it. But it looks like I can just go right into complaining about it. WorldCat has gone way down the last couple of years. It's incredibly frustrating. They now offer featured libraries versus all libraries. They're no longer allowing people to just look at this information without signing in. There should be no reason that people need to sign in to see this information unless they want to start selling us stuff. WorldCat is a not-for-profit membership organization owned by, not owned, but it's run by libraries around the world, and they intend for it to be not the clearly kind of for-profit thing that it has become. So it's very frustrating. I'm really upset with what this has become. It used to be really valuable. You could just put in, you could find a book and then you put in a zip code and it would show you, whoops, I meant to do 98102, which libraries near you had that book. Now it's working. Don't know why it wasn't working before. So now I can see that if I wanted to find that book because I was interested in those page numbers, I could see that Tacoma Public Library is the nearest library that has that book. You can't borrow it this way. You can't, it's really, let's see if I can, maybe it will, maybe I was a little bit unfair on it before. This is my location. I'm in okay, so and I can see that Cornell University Library owns it. Princeton University Library is the next closest library. So it is working a little bit better than it should. I don't know why we're a featured library. It should be all library. This is just this stuff I am still furious about. They've done a lot of changes. These links used to take you directly to all the records about that specific subject heading, and it no longer does that. It's just now doing a search for the two words Monongahela and bark. And so here we get inventory of beech bark disease in the Monongahela National Forest. So you can find some of this, but it's much harder. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a tall ships event in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I was talking about the database to folks who would come by in the exhibits area, and there were a bunch of there were a bunch of tall ships there. One of them is called When and If, and so folks who were sailors on When and If wanted to come in, and so we did a search. And we found When and If in the database, and then we had links to WorldCat. But now that they are not specific, they're just searching for the terms. It's literally searching for the words when and an if. And how often do you think that those words are going to come up in millions and millions of bibliographic records? Well, probably just about every single one of them is going to have it. So that's an example of where it has this really failed, has gone down in value. Unfortunately, though, it's the only thing we have for searching all the libraries all at once. At least for right now it is. Maybe we'll find a better solution over time. But so it's still useful. It is where it breaks down is if you do find, so this one we can guess this is at San Francisco Maritime National Historic Park, and it is. But sometimes they will say they're not in any library at all. And this is where if you were to find a handwritten manuscript record from a guide, this would be a pretty common instance where you would see no libraries are shown at all. And for that reason, I want to emphasize that a little further down, like a lot further down, actually, at paragraph 4 of my guide, there's a link to a blog post that I wrote a number of years ago that helps you find that information. And it's particularly relevant, I think, for genealogists. If you were to find a resource, I did this. This is from the blog post right now, just so you can see it. Jenny Cushman, bark. So here we find a log or a journal from the Jenny Cushman, but it said no libraries hold this. Well, some library obviously does hold it. Now, what the solution to this is to use NUCMUC, the National Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections. And essentially, the holdings in NUCMUC are loaded into WorldCat, but the locations are not. It's kind of crazy. So it's actually the bibliographic description is it loaded into WorldCat, but the holdings, that is the place that actually holds that resource, are not. So it's too bad. But it can be done. You can find them through this way. I actually feel like this example that's here is a very important one to use if you are searching in WorldCat and you find something where it says, sorry, no libraries with a specified item were found. This is a super important point if you come up on that, like how to get around that. And the answer is to use NUCMUC. It's not an obvious answer, but that is what to do. So I'm going to go back to the ship index for a couple minutes, and then I'll move on to a bunch of other resources. There's of course, there are tons of different vessels with the same name. Vessels are not like racehorses. Everybody, they all share the same name. They change their names a whole lot more than people think. And we've had a lot of different names over time. And so often we will have no idea which, in this case, I typed in the word endurance, looking for ships named Endurance. And we found 249 citations from 52 different resources. Some of these, the Daily Telegraph Book of Naval Obituaries, we have no idea which Endurance they're talking about. That information was not in the index when I collected the index to put into the database. If we go further down, we see a little bit more AMC 77, so I could probably bring those together, but haven't yet because it's actually a fair bit of work to do so. But in these examples up here, here's Endurance, the most famous Endurance, Shackleton's Endurance that went to search Antarctica. And so if I click on this, I get to find a lot more information about this specific vessel named Endurance, not every vessel named Endurance. What we do here is we pull a little bit of information from Wikidata, which is a great big huge organized database that underlies all of the different Wikipedias that exist. Remember, Wikipedia is not only in English, it's in hundreds of different languages, and each different language uses Wikidata as an identifier, a way of providing more information, more data about that specific item, whatever it might be. So we're not at all looking at descriptive text about it, because of course that's in many different languages. What we're looking at is specific data points, like the date the vessel was built or launched, and what kind of vessel it was, who the captain was at any given time. There's a whole bunch of that information that can be added to Wikidata. So this is what we have here. So each of these are about this specific endurance. It makes it easier to do research in that area. And for naval vessels, you'll find we've done quite a lot of this. For non-naval vessels, it's a little bit harder, because with the naval vessels, generally the citation will include a hull number, which makes it much easier to know that you're looking at the right vessel. So, and another thing that we do here, I just want to point out, we use the Wikidata identifier. So this is an open tool. You can create a link to this page very easily if you know what the Wikidata identifier is. You know it's going to be shipindex.org/vessels/Q whatever. And the Q whatever is an identifier in Wikidata. Again, so just as an example, this is Wikidata, and this is that Q identifier. This is a lot of data points that are kept in here. And then let's see if we see, I can never quite remember. There's a list of all of the different Wikipedias that have entries about this particular vessel. So anyway, that's an overview of an example of what you can do in the database. Also, and one of the ones I like to use as an example is WASP. We've had 8 or 9 or 10 different USS WASPs in the U.S. Navy. There have been other HMS WASPs, and then there are some that are just WASP that weren't a naval vessel and don't have that USS or HMS. So we've done this to try to make it a lot easier for people to do research. WASP has nearly 1,000 different citations from 266 different resources. So I hope that that's a little bit useful. I guess I'd like to pause for a moment and see if anybody has a question about about the database and how it works in this case.
Barbara Joe had a question. She said that she has an ancestor named Duncan Stewart who immigrated to Massachusetts as a prisoner in 1650 or 54 on the ship Unity. There is no ship's log to prove this. Is there another way?
The answer to that is that I don't know. But the approach that I take here is, okay, who would have made that record? Who would have made a record about that? And where would it have been stored? So if, if this person came over in 1650, it's a little early for colonial newspapers, I imagine. If there were Commonwealth records that described, like if they came and they were immediately put into jail here, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a good answer for that. The challenge there is that you don't, well, first, if you were doing a search here, you would look at Unity and you'd, uh, uh, you'd be like, well, which of these unities am I looking at? There's 715 citations. Here's an HMS Unity from the 1660, built in 1665. So that is a little bit too late. Let me see if I can.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Peter. This is Barbara Joe. I'm the one that
Yep.
sent in the text about the immigration to Massachusetts in 1650. Wouldn't there be records on the English side?
Well, I don't know if there would necessarily. I don't know if there would necessarily be a record, because the question is, was anyone specifically keeping track of people who were leaving at the time? There are, so maybe the thing to do would be to look in English court records, and there are some. I looked at Old Bailey sites. I don't know how far the Old Bailey goes back. That could be a great place to look, and maybe not worry about the vessel at all, but look for evidence to indicate that he was a prisoner, and then maybe he was put on board a specific ship at that point.
Also,
So
Peter, you made a good point earlier about looking for diaries or accounts from other passengers who were on the ship in the hopes that maybe her ancestor might be mentioned in their account.
Yeah. So here's ship's logs. Now I know this is a century too late, okay, but this is a bunch of ship's logs. Now we see that this is at Harvard. So that's good. They showed us there, and you can see all the ships. So there is a ship's log in this collection that includes some sort of log for Unity. Now I understand that this is too late for you, but these are the kind of things that you might be able to find. This is the best way that I know of to look for those logbooks. Actually, there are some bibliographies of collections of logbooks, and I had created a collection of all of those bibliographies on WorldCat, and it got deleted. So that's another reason why I'm a little bit bitter at WorldCat, to be honest. But what you can do as a start is to be not logged into the website and do search, and because what you want to do is search for the WorldCat entries, and you won't be disturbed as much by the others that are in the subscription database. I can keep going to each page. What I would then do is say, okay, does WorldCat appear on any of these? There's not a lot of other way to go to see if there are other WorldCat records. Oh, there's two on this page. Okay, so here's a Unity schooner. Again, we don't really know what we're going to find. 1775. Going back to 1650 is certainly a challenge. Yes, Marlene, do you have a question?
Yes. Peter, are you aware of the powder logs from Fort Amsterdam under the Dutch?
No.
Okay. I think it's in O'Callahan's collection from the library, from the New York State Library. But apparently, whenever a ship came in to the harbor, which we know today is New York Harbor, the fort at Amsterdam would fire a cannon. And they made a log of the names of the ships and the master. Now, that does not obviously include passenger information, but it would give you a pretty complete list of the ships that entered New York Harbor during the Dutch colonial period. My interest is that one of the ships, apparently named, if I remember this correctly, De Plumen de Klerk, entered in 1663 in in July and November. And I believe I have an ancestor on the July entry, but I can't find the documents that support his living on the South River, the Delaware River, during the time that I think he lived there. But if you didn't know about those, I thought you might like to add them to your list.
Thank you. I will track that down. That sounds great. I'll use that also as a tell me if I'm spelling was Blumen spelled sort of like this? I guess not. Blumendahl. These are some of the ways you can do some more advanced searching. If you look at our help page, it provides some real good examples. This isn't obvious. The ways of doing this research are not obvious, and we are going to, that's one of our projects, is to update this. But this is the best example where if you put the caret item in the front, it will just look in the ship name field. So this is a way of finding some more records, and also being sure to search around variations in spelling as well. There's a lot that you can so if you know that an ancestor served on, say, let's just do Inver star, that should find every ship that starts with Inver and then has some set of words after it. And there, as you can see, there's quite a few of them. You can also limit your search. If you do a search for, this is really kind of overdoing it, but Elizabeth, and I see other matching ships. There's many hundreds there, but we see Alaska Queen that doesn't have the word Elizabeth in the ship name. We can do this to limit it just to entries where the word Elizabeth is in the actual ship name. And then we can, we still have hundreds and hundreds, not surprisingly, because this is how a lot of this happened.
Peter, what about if you don't know the name of the ship, but you know where the ship sailed from? Is there a way to search for that?
You can't search in here. The thing to do then, I believe, is to go to newspapers, especially because you know when you sail that, but all you're going to find then is just a bunch of ships that sailed at that time. You're not necessarily going to be able to figure out too much there. I often have people asking me about, tracking down individuals, and you all know far better than a lot of the people that I'm talking with. I say, well, there's no way that I can compete with, find my past and family search and ancestry and all of those different all the different MyHeritage, all the different genealogy companies. I mean, I say, you're looking at my company. This is it. And those are huge companies with incredible budgets and incredible numbers of people doing a huge amount of work. So they are a much better place for finding information about people. I really am interested in finding information about vessels. So obviously, this is not the only place to do research on ships, and there are a lot of resources online that that are not in my database yet for various reasons. One is this Lloyd's Register of Ships. I mean, these Lloyd's Register has been they've been creating a register, like a phone book of ships every year for a long time, since the 1760s. This is different from Lloyd's List and the Lloyd's newspaper, which is basically the earliest newspaper, one of the earliest newspapers that's been actually probably the earliest that's still in existence. But so what we see here, and there are clearly a couple that did not survive, but the Lloyd's Register Company, which is the insurance company, has digitized as many as that they could find, and now you can see. So this is a reprint of a digitized version of it. There's a little bit of information. So here's Maddie, and then these are other ships named Maddie. That's the ditto. Owner was William Fox from Virginia. I think probably the master of the captain's Bogle. Of course, you need to do a little bit of research to figure out exactly what each column means, but you can find some of this going back to this is 1768. Others have got more recent information available online, like this ship register directory for vessels that are currently registered in Australian waters. In the United States, we have the Merchant Vessels of the United States, which is most larger vessels. There are a couple of other registers. There's some that, of course, some of the vessels that don't need any kind of record obviously don't appear. It's the same idea. Who would have made a record about this, and where would they have put it? If you're looking at a rowboat with a name on it, nobody's going to make a record of that anybody could reasonably access. Mark, I see you have a hand raised. Is there a question?
Yeah, just a real quick question. Speaking back on Lloyd's, I've always used the German pioneers, the passenger lists, and I've narrowed it down to a specific ship, which is listed and it always has been since 1934. And it's called the L'Abri, from a bark from London with a Captain Young in Philadelphia, arriving in Philadelphia, 1788. I could never find anything on the L'Abri, nothing anywhere. So I decided to jump into Lloyd's, looking at both Lloyd's List and Lloyd's Register. And I find that in the list, there was actually a departure from London, which matched. There was an arrival in Philadelphia on the day that, it said it arrived. But the name was the Ark, the Brigantine Ark. And then the Ark shows up in the Lloyd's Register. Why would that book call it L'Abri? When it comes, when it's in that German pioneers, Pennsylvania German pioneers. L'Abri versus Ark is, to me, it's not even a translation. It's completely different name. And I know that's a tough question, but it's been perplexing me why I can find all the Lloyd stuff on this Ark and the dates match and the captain matches. But, this L'Abri that's listed in.
How was L'Abri spelled?
L-E space B-R-I-E.
Okay. Like the cheese, huh?
Yep, exactly.
This is what you're mentioning, basically.
Correct. It pops up, but it doesn't match because I actually pulled the registers of vessels arrivals and clearance for Philadelphia for that date, and it gives specific name of the ship, and the captain matches, and the embarkation of London and the arrival in Philadelphia on the 6th, and the pilot and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't call it L'Abri; it calls it the Ark, or the Brigantine Ark.
Well, maybe there was just a mistake made. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
I don't have any insight into why that might have been the case.
But I'm definitely going to dig around in here.
Okay, great. So, and you saw the search that I did there.
Correct.
And this is there's nearly 4 million citations in here. I can see that this was corrected, listed as IE Brie. It sounds like the real ship name should be Le Brie. And so there was a mistake there, but I could change it to Le Brie, and then it would line up with this one, which sounds like it's more likely the answer, the same ship name. And we do have a spot in here. If you see something, you can report an error. It's an opportunity to say, hey, I think you might have a mistake in there, which we hope, we help people, will help make this whole database more accurate. This one also you can see is one where we show that there are passenger or crew lists that are available, and others will indicate if an image is there, or those are the main things. Some of them are on the web, things like that. There are some earlier ship registers that exist here. This is an example of one from New Bedford, Massachusetts, 1796 to 1850. And this is, I believe, one that's been compiled over time. Whereas, and Mystic Seaport, for example, has got a whole bunch of actual ones that like the American Lloyd's registers that have been digitized and transcribed to the best of their ability throughout the mid to late 19th century. And all the names of those vessels are included in the database. And sometimes, often there are corrections when I come across them. This one, there's no index to this, so I haven't added this to say that Nautilus is on page 228, and it's the ship of New Bedford, for example. So there are lots of other resources, tons of resources beyond the ship index database. I find more all the time, and I'm trying to find ways of adding them whenever I can, but some of them I absolutely can't. Another example I pulled off my shelf is this one, this book, British Warship Names, and it's just, a directory of names of vessels and just a little tiny bit of information about each one of them. So there are a lot of other resources. I need to make a list of all of those resources so that it's easier for folks to know about them, because some of these things probably weren't aware of. One of the things that we mentioned earlier in the reference to Lloyd's list as well is newspapers, and newspapers to me are just incredibly valuable resources, especially the older ones online. And I like to use this list of online newspaper archives. It's from around the world, and it does also break down the United States by state as well. And some of these resources are freely available, some of them aren't. Maybe sometimes there's just an index. These are a couple of different, but it's important to know about. And of course, many are probably aware of Chronicling America, the Library of Congress's collection of newspapers. And if we have time and if there's interest, I can show some examples of ways of getting around the challenges, the limitations here, because the real challenge here is that frankly the OCR work, the conversion of these images to text, is quite bad. I've gotten a lot of files of that over time, and had hoped to do some work in that area, and we found that it just wasn't workable. And so if you can't if the text is wrong, then you can't feel certain that when I type in, you know, schooner Mary Ann or something, that it's gonna bring back all of the mentions in there. You can be actually, you could be certain that it's not going to, because of the challenges in the digitization process, but more importantly in the transcription process. In this case, it found found a couple of what's I know I should have put it in quotes, obviously. Toluca or schooner and Mary Ann in quotes, to see if that drops us down from 104,000 citations. I think it'll drop us down quite a lot. One collection that I would like to highlight, and I think is an encouraging and a great path to go, and you know, not that far for those of you who are in Reno, is the California Digital Newspaper collection. And this is just an amazing collection, and there have been some real challenges with keeping this operating over the last year or so. But the best part about it, I think, I'll just do a search for schooner just because, so we can get to a page, is that this one allows anybody to add corrections as they go. If they are looking at the transcription, they say, oh, that's not right, and I'd like to take some time to change it and fix it. You can do that, and you don't even need to log in. Here's the schooner C.A. Thayer, which is now a museum ship in San Francisco. When these load, you can see that often the you can just, once it loads, you'll be able to just update it over here, which is pretty neat. Well, this one actually looks quite good. Well, there you could say, oh, that should be Outer Harbor. I think there's some programmatic things they could have done to fix a lot more of it, but they didn't. And so there have been times where I was having a tough time at work, and I was like, what should I be doing? And so I would take a break and just edit some of these things and make changes. And so it's a pretty neat resource. Another one, if you're looking outside the United States, is the Trove collection in Australia. We are doing some exciting work in that, where I hope we're going to be able to have a neat way of searching Trove, and then eventually CDNC and other collections of newspapers for ships in there, to make it a lot easier to discover them. So to turn to that, I want to talk a little bit about these. So you can see that these are not great. Some of these, what was it? The schooner Curlick, presumably that's the schooner Eric. I don't see it exactly right now, but something like that. There's always going to be some things that can be better, and the better way to search these is through the paid database collections. George says, I see that it's now available again. Yeah, it had a lot of challenges, and it was being all of this data. I think the real problem is that there's a huge amount of data here is incredibly valuable for the large language models that underlie AI. And so AI tools have been just hammering this site, trying to download as much information as they can. And I guess you got to think, well, when they absorb the word vessels, you got to wonder how accurate they'll be in the future. But these things are free, right? And that's great. That's really neat. There are drawbacks because they don't have the resources to edit them directly. And if you have, so what I'm going to do for a moment is go to my workplace. Right now I have access because I'm a librarian here, so I can log into ProQuest historical newspapers, and just, you know, it'll get me in, and then I can do searching here. And what I will find is that when I do search, so I'm searching all of these different databases, Chicago, Irish Times. There are other collections. These are big national newspapers. If I I could just look at the New York Tribune and the Tribune Herald. This is the best newspaper to look at for early arrivals in New York City, not the New York Times. Wonder if we would find, I know that this is a lot later than what you were looking at. But I guess that the point that I would make is that when we're looking at this, what I'd actually like to see the text, if they'll show us the text, it's going to be much more accurate. And so the thing that I would say is, and I just want to emphasize this is probably something that you've often heard from Suzanne, is that, you know, libraries welcome walk-in visitors. Most libraries welcome walk-in visitors. The big academic state-run libraries like the University of will generally welcome visitors to come in and use these resources. I sign licenses for our university, and we try hard to make sure that these resources allow anyone, a walk-in user, to use the resources, not just the people who are affiliated with the institution. If you're off campus, of course, you have to be affiliated with the institution. But if you walk in there, there's all kinds of resources that you can use, and you will find that the work here, the underlying text is much better in this case. So if I'm not quite sure how I would want to search this. I did the Schooner, Marianne. So I'll see how much these are all okay. I am limited to the New York Daily Tribune here, but I can expand it to many more databases to make this work. For example, I can go in the database, and this is stuff that you can do when you're using these resources in a library. And another thing that I want to highlight is that ProQuest is not the only one of these. Newsbank has got a lot of newspapers as well. And then Accessible Archives has got a lot of 19th century newspapers too. So those are really useful ones to mention. And then there's newspapers.com, which has subscriptions to individuals. And then the next thing I want to talk about, I'm going to use this as a way of segueing into LibGuides. This is an example of newspaper, the LibGuides that we have at our institution about where to find news articles. LibGuides it's a platform, it's a product that maybe most libraries subscribe to as a way of organizing information by experts for the students and the faculty or the patrons in a public library to do their research. And it's a great place to find information put together by an expert in this. Oh yeah, well, you know, the Suzanne's page about the program is a LibGuide. It's the whole structure. It's there's a lot more information there, but it's the same tool that you will find in most libraries. And so if you were doing research on, say, an ancestor who's in Michigan, and you're like, where do I go to learn more about local Michigan history? I would suggest you start at the University of Michigan. You look for a LibGuide about local history, and the librarians there will have created a guide that will be far better than just about any other resource you could find. I think that using LibGuides is a really great way to discover the resources that would be useful to you in certain areas, especially when you don't know anything about those areas. So I have a couple of examples of LibGuides. So state history. Okay, I used one from University of UT, University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And let's see, what do they probably have, East Tennessee in the world, or the local history or something like that. And you'll find, usually you'll find useful citations there about different things. And these are always, LibGuides are always freely accessible for anyone to get to. And I guess there are not very many in maritime history, but I got my master's in maritime history from East Carolina University, so it's no surprise that the librarians at East Carolina University have made a LibGuide about where you can go to use the resources that they have compiled. So that's something that I think is really important to take use of, and I think that a lot of people don't. You may see that there are these certain things that are for ECU only, but now you know that they exist and that they might be useful for what you are researching. And then, of course, you can find specialized libraries that will be helpful. There's the Inland Waterways Library at the St. Louis Mercantile Library. I think this is just, I've never had a chance to visit this, but I think it's such a great example of a unique library. It's quite something. In the maritime world, there's the Mystic Seaport Museum in Mystic, Connecticut. There's the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia. Their collection has, for the most part, gone to Christopher Newport University, so they probably have got some good guides there. There are many others. San Francisco Maritime National Historic Park has got a great library. It's a little bit harder to visit these days because of staff cutbacks there, but it's got an incredible collection. It's a great indication of all of the content that has not, all the content in the world that's not yet been digitized. So we're at an hour, so if you will bear with me, I'd like to talk about two other things. One, to get some feedback from you, perhaps, and then one more to show you what I think is one really neat tool. So first of all, I have this goal of writing a guide to maritime history research. That's my next path. I made this tool that I think is useful for helping people learn about ships, and now I want to write a book about how to do that and all the different resources that exist, all the things I showed today, and of course there's many more. And so I would pose a question to you. What are the kinds of things that what are the sort of questions that you have about maritime history when you're doing genealogy? Are there things where you get stumped and you'd like to find some other path? So maybe if people will think about that, you could put something in the chat, or we'll open it up for a bit of discussion in just a minute. The last thing that I do want to talk about, however, is how to use discovery layers. And I want to show you what a discovery layer is. First, almost every academic library and a lot of public libraries, you'll come to the library homepage and you see this search box. You can put in anything in there, and I keep going back to Schooner Mary Ann. I don't know why I keep doing that, but I do. So when I search this, it's going off and searching a whole bunch of different databases all at once. Now it's finding the books that are in our catalog. It finds things from digital collections, some of our repositories. It may find databases. It may find other things. And then it finds these results from articles and full text. If I click on that and I go into the database, now I've gone past where just somebody on the web could go. I am now, I'm logged in, and I had logged in. You saw me log in before. So here's a Schooner Mary Ann from U.S. Congress in 1914. The Mary Ann, an illicit adventure in a JSTOR, a journal that's now in JSTOR. Here's a neat thing from Archive Grid. Look at that, deed of sale for Schooner Mary Ann, 1832. Wouldn't that, let's see if it'll actually take us to that. That would be, we are now defeated once again. Oh, okay. So it's using Archive Grid, which is kind of similar to NUCMUC in a way, in showing what holdings are in archives. And they apparently don't realize that. I don't think we have access to that anymore. But what I want to highlight is that there's a lot of ways to do this, but there are ways that you can do this as well. And so first, I want just give you a little bit of background. I don't want to go in too deep, but I do know a lot of the background on this, so I can if you really want. But there are basically two different types of discovery layers out there. One comes from a company called EBSCO, and that is EDS, the EBSCO Discovery Service. That's what I'm using right here because that's the one that Cornell subscribes to. The other one is from a company called ProQuest. And you saw earlier that I was looking in the ProQuest historical newspapers. That is either Summon or Primo. They use a platform called Alma, and I believe that's what you have at TMCC. There's a big difference between the two because, well, first of all, these are like the equivalent of Google for subscription databases. And so they're looking inside these subscription databases. Now, which Google can't do because the Google doesn't have contracts to do that. And they can only do this when they do have a contract with these different publishers. Most publishers recognize that it makes sense to have their content visible through these discovery layers because so many people start and end their search right at this search box right here. But not surprisingly, ProQuest won't allow its full text content to be digitized by EBSCO in EBSCO's knowledge database, their discovery layer, and EBSCO won't let their unique content be digitized by ProQuest in their discovery layer. So none of these and there are other resources like primarily in business areas where they also won't allow either of the companies to digitize to index all of that content. So it means that you will never be searching everything that exists digitally, everything that exists that the library subscribes to. And it is also limited to those resources that the library does subscribe to. So my recommendation is always to use a discovery layer that comes from, there are two recommendations. One, use a discovery layer that comes from the ProQuest company because they include all of their historical newspapers in there, whereas the EBSCO one doesn't. You'd say, well, how in the world do I know which one is which? And there are ways, but you would not be expected to know which one is which, okay? But I'll give you an idea or two. Next, the second thing I would suggest is use the largest library that you can, because the biggest libraries in the country subscribe to more content and therefore have more content in their discovery layers than do the smaller ones. So why don't we just go to the top? Because I happen to know that, whoops, I should have said library.yale.edu. Actually, it might be library, it might be libraries. Sometimes you just have to go, okay, see, they've got a search box there. Now, I have no connection with Yale. I have no way of logging into theirs. I've never had a Yale account, nothing like that. So what I am doing is something that you can do as well. Now I'm gonna take a little bit of a risk here. I'm gonna go back to Chronicling America. We had that search for Schooner Mary Ann, and we found 1,300 records, which is pretty good. And if I limit that by date and I limit that by location, it's gonna go down quite a lot because this is completely, because all of this is the poorly, I mean, it's the stuff that's been machine transcribed. But when we go to, whoops, I gotta go find, there we go. When we are searching here, we're searching the stuff from these subscription databases where it's been hand typed instead of being done by a machine. Or it's much more accurate. And there are ways of, so you can use this to search for a huge amount of the collection, even when you have no access at all. Now, of course, you're going to come up with a wall, and I'll show you where that wall is. I should again put the quotes in here as I do this, and I'm going to make some changes because so I found 4 results, 5 results. You're like, well, that Peter, that's not that impressive. What's going on here? And the answer is because they don't include newspaper content in it because they would be overwhelmed with newspaper content. And what we find here, we find loss of the schooner Mary Ann Gunn from the New York Times in 1861. We find an article from the Washington Post. We find a lot more accurate information here. And what we can do if we say, oh, Mary Ann Gunn, that's exactly the one that I'm searching for. I want to follow. Oh, I want to read this online. Let's go take a look. Well, now you have to log in. And as I said, I don't have a password. You probably don't have a password. And so you're stuck. But you do know the citation, 1861, November 12th, page 5, New York Times. And you can go back to Chronicling America. It'll take a little while, but you can go to the New York Times, and you can go to that specific article, and now you know to go directly to that page, where you may not have found that in when you were searching in here. You might not. I don't know for sure. I don't have a specific example, but I think that you'll find that to be the case. If you've got a term that is, pretty somewhat rare, you can narrow it down a fair bit. You can do, you could do, they don't have to be next to each other. You could say schooner near 5. I think that's probably how they do it. I don't know for sure. Let's find out. That means schooner, the word schooner within 5 words of the phrase Mary Ann. It doesn't actually seem to be doing that. So I'm just going to do just do schooner and Mary Ann, and we find 206 results. They should have both those words in there. They may not. We can see what we can find then. But what I'm trying to say is that you can do much deeper research. This is for intermediate and advanced researchers, in my opinion. I think if you're starting, then you can absolutely walk into a library and search the resources there, as long as they will allow that, and most of them will. If you really want to dive in, you've got an unusual name of an individual, you can just search for that individual's name. Through this process, you can choose your major research library. The only thing is that it ought to be one that uses the ProQuest or ALMA database, and librarytechnologies.org is the place to figure out who's using what. Yale's using it, and I think Harvard is as well. So why not just start at the very top and then go from there? So that is that's a quick. I know I was talking pretty quickly. I hope that the handout is maybe useful to bring back a couple of the items that I was mentioning, and I hope that perhaps some of this information is a bit helpful to you in doing your own research. With that, I'm happy to open up for other questions, and I would, of course, welcome any thoughts the folks have about what they think should appear in a printed guide to doing maritime history research. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, let's open it up to the class. Class, go ahead if you have a question, unmute your microphone, or comment about what should be included in his upcoming book. The one thing one topic that seems to be of interest to genealogists, I found, teaching this class for 8 years now, is disasters. Titanic, Sultana, those types of disasters, because those are, I don't want to sound morbid or anything, but those are the kinds of stories that when you tell your relatives that you're researching your family, just like the black sheep in anyone's family is more interesting to your relatives to try to drum up interest in family genealogy, so are disasters.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah. There's a book that I find really kind of funny. It's let's see if I can remember the name of it. It's in my resources directory of all the it is that's not it. It's basically a book about collisions between US naval vessels and non-naval vessels. And it just seems like such an unusual book to me. I've always found it intriguing.
Another one I think that people are interested in are, especially during the World Wars, World War I, World War II, since those are pretty easy ancestors to trace, to know more information about the ship that their ancestor was on during the World Wars.
Yeah, yeah. There's a huge amount of information that can be found there. And one area where I think this database is really interesting is in Navy Records Society volumes. The Navy Records Society is is a British organization that has been publishing primary documents in naval history, in British naval history, for like the last 120 years or so. And so of course they cover this early with this volume from 1899 obviously has no reference to World War I or World War II, but they've been publishing ever since. And you can find sort of like side references um, to ships, mentions of ships that you might not find otherwise. For example, you may find mentions of slave voyages there, where an anti-slavery campaign, a group of ships took control of various ships that were and hopefully saved the folks who were on board, for example. There were a lot of British anti-slavery excursions, for lack of a better word, to try to stop slavers. So these Navy Record Society volumes can mention all kinds of ships. Then of course there's a DANFIS, the Dictionary of American Naval DANFIS, Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships, something like that. It's the official history of short histories of U.S. naval vessels, and it was I don't know, 8, 9, 10 volumes. Now it's just digitized and it's freely available online as well, and provides a great history of a lot of different American naval ships. Hopefully all of them.
You know, one of the biggest frustrations I've had in doing ship research is the fact that everything's scattered. You know, one website to the next website to the next website. You know, that's just, I mean, I guess that's just part of doing genealogy is just having the patience to go out and look at all those different resources. But I must admit, it is rather frustrating.
Yeah. And you know, that I find it interesting when I look at what libraries or what museums have, and you think about when I went to University of North Carolina for my library degree, and I worked on a project there, a proposed exhibit of things relating to the USS North Carolina. And so the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is nowhere close to the ocean, you know, they collect comprehensively about that state, and so they have everything they can get their hands on about the USS North Carolina, for example. And you'll see the same thing at the University of Oklahoma. You know, you find ships named USS Oklahoma or Ponca City or something like that. They will most likely be collecting comprehensively about that. And so you'll find collections just scattered all over in places where they don't have any, they had no, kind of have no connection to the sea at all.
I think Suzanne from Washington had her hand up. Suzanne, did you have a question for our guest speaker?
Well, yes, a question and some comments. I have always been fascinated by the ships that my ancestors came over on. And I've tried to do all kinds of extensive research on them, not only on them, but the captains of the ships, what happened to them, where they went. And like the other Suzanne was saying, that many of them were retrofitted to serve during the war. And there were some disasters, you know, that happened and that type of thing. So that's always fascinated me. But I have most of my family, they came over in the 1890s. So it's recent immigrants to this country. My Swedish grandfather, in the Swedish books in 1883, it said he went to sea. Okay, he went to sea. He always said he traveled around the world, that he was a seaman, that he was on a sailing ship. Well, who knew? You know, was he really just, sort of broadening what he actually did or not? So I followed that up, and I found him on the Swedish, their seamanship records. And on that, it said that he had signed on to a British ship, the Fiery Cross. And it gave the ship's number, the tonnage, the whole thing. And that he had also served before as a seaman out of Denmark. So I followed up on the Fiery Cross, did the Lloyd's Register, that type of thing. And I wanted to find, well, what about the log books and so on for the Fiery Cross? Where do I find that information? Now, this is taxing my memory. I'm almost 86 right now. So I looked back to see when I was doing this research, and it was 1991. And good thing, I got copies of my letters and so on. But for the time period where my grandfather signed on the ship in 1883 and the Fiery Cross, those records I had to go to Newfoundland. Let's see, University of Newfoundland. And they're the ones that actually had the agreement and ship accounts for the crew. It is fascinating, just absolutely fascinating, because it not only describes each port where this vessel that he signed on to, but where it was prior to when he, signed on the ship. But each port, there's a stamp, and then it says if people deserted, and if they hired on new people, it would describe what food they had to eat, all kinds of stuff. It was just fascinating. The problem is, my grandfather only stayed on that ship for a couple of months. It says he signed on in August of 1883 in Helsingborg, Sweden. Then he was discharged in Newport in September. Well, then I lose track of him until on his declaration of intention, which he didn't fill out until 1937 or something. But I did back the dates that he said that he arrived in Astoria, Oregon, August the 20th, 1885 is what he said. So, oh, there you have it. Oh, how cool is that? Let me see if I get my glasses straight. Yes. Yeah.
So this is from 1881. This was a ship out of Liverpool. And if you see what we found, this is the record from 1881. This is like a US version of the American Lloyd's. And there are 3 different Fiery Crosses listed here. So, it's a challenge to figure out which one we're talking about.
Does it have the ship number? The number is 62457. It's like 337 tons. It was a brigantine.
Official number and the signal letter. So I think that I don't know. I don't know. These would not be
Banff. I see Banff.
Uh-huh.
I think that's where it was from.
Uh-huh. Banff. Yeah. So it can take some doing to track these things down. Absolutely. But I went to Memorial University of Newfoundland and their Maritime History Archive, which is probably what you used, right?
Yes, it is. It is.
I don't know why it won't take me back to the homepage.
That is cool. All right.
I started
is that a free site that we can go to?
Yeah, this is, yeah.
See, he says that the ship that he said that he jumped ship in Astoria in August the 20th, 1885. And the ship was named the Albatross.
Really?
There's all kinds of ships named the Albatross. I went through the newspaper for Astoria, the shipping news and so on, to see if I could get some other information. But I could never find a ship by that name that was in the port there at Astoria at that time. But well, I guess 2 questions. If you have some suggestions about finding a ship called the Albatross, and also when he got off ship in 1883 in Newport, I'm assuming that he signed on to another ship. And how would I go about finding him?
Well, and so that goes back to my thoughts about who would have recorded that and where would it have been? Perhaps 1883 in Oregon, they were keeping records of sailors arriving and departing. You know, I wouldn't think they would in, you know, the 17th century, but in the late 19th century, it's very possible. And then the question is, what are the chances that those records survived? If they survived, where would they be? And if they still, you know, if you figure out where they are, can they be searched?
Okay.
So I think it can be very difficult.
Okay. Okay. Well, there's
So
a few named the
over
albatross.
1,000 citations for albatross. And of course,
Yes.
all of these have no additional information, so you really don't know much about them. But if I go on, once I come down a little bit, you can see, oh, 1828 to 1833, that's obviously not the one I'm interested in. And you get a little bit more information about each one of them. So
Okay.
definitely can take some time, there's no question.
Yeah. But all right. Thank you.
There is the Stephen Morse website if you're looking for, you know, certain manifest and ship information. I believe it's I think he calls it his one-step page.
Right, and a lot of newspapers there, right?
Morse.org.
Yeah.
Well, if there are no other questions, I will thank you all for your time. Maybe I'll listen for a little bit to hear what kind of discussions you have, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. You're more than invited to stay for the second half of class, whatever your time will allow. And we really appreciate your time and your expertise, Peter. And also thank you for allowing us to record. It'll take our marketing department a couple weeks to get it up and posted, but it should be there hopefully very, very soon.
Great. Thank you again. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, and I will go ahead and stop the recording, but before I do it, I wanted to just make two announcements. First announcement is everybody is welcome once again to stay for the second half of class. I hope you all do. However, if you plan to leave us at this point in time, if there's anything in the chat box that you want, please download it now before you log out, because if you log back in and you forgot to download the chat box, your chat box will be empty. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.